Greetings, brothers and sisters. Shalom. Assalamu alaikum ad nastana. Pleasure to be back with you here on Points of Light Radio. And it's a pleasure to be continuing on with our series on world leaders and fraternalism. Now, on a cold winter's day like this, when I'm fighting a bit of a cold, and I'm going to have to go out there shovel my walk soon and have some business I need to attend to, I thought it would be a wonderful thing to go to Australia, right? Australia is where we're going today, and we're going to discuss the prime ministers of Australia and the relationship with fraternalism. Not all were just Freemasons. So I love this. This is very interesting. Some of them belong to some organizations that I'd never heard of before. Actually, at least one of them did. So let's move forward with this segment. And like I said, try to stay warm. Just to give you some insight, brothers and sisters, Freemasonry was probably the first fraternal order that arrived in Australia. And they probably arrived with the first fleet in 1788, okay? And the first meetings were probably held by officers and members of the British Army. However, the first formal meetings were not held until the 1800s. Much like a lot of other organizations, there were, shall we say, informal or non-recorded meetings of these organizations. Now, in the 1800s, early sometime, probably a regular Freemason activity, as I said, arrived and was recorded on Norfolk Island and in Sydney in 1803. In 1816, the first public Masonic ceremony in Australia was held, and it involved the laying of the foundation stone by the Lodge of Social and Military Virtues number 227. Okay? In 1820, the first stationary or permanent lodge, shall we say, up until then they had a lot of traveling warrants, was established. And the Australian Social Lodge number 260 was established under the Irish Constitution in Sydney, Australia. In 1824, the Lodge of Leinster Marine of Australia, number 266, under the Irish Constitution, was formed. In 1828, the first English Constitution Lodge, called the Lodge of Australia, number 820, was warranted. Now, other fraternal orders were to follow. The Royal Antediluvian Order of Buffaloes, also known as the Buffs, reached Australia primarily through migration of members of the British Isles around the 1870s. They were probably holding meetings before that. The order expanded alongside the British Commonwealth, with early members often theater hands, technicians, and workers establishing lodges as they traveled. The first Buffalo lodges were formed by traveling workers. An example of that is the Fremantle Buffalo Club that was founded in 1938 by the RAOB, and it operated in a former restaurant. Now, here's another one. You'll be hearing more about this organization later on. I was quite fascinated by it when I read into it. The Theosophical Society established a presence in Australia between 1891 and 1895. It was driven by international lectures from leaders like Colonel Henry Steele Olcott, and the efforts of figures such as Isabel Cooper Oakley, seen here. Although an Australian member was enrolled as early as 1879, the first branch of the Theosophical Society was not established until 1889 in Tasmania. Now, the movement was particularly appealing. The Theosophical Society was kind of a movement. It was particularly appealing to intellectual, artistic, and socially active circles in cities like Melbourne, and it attracted figures such as the future Prime Minister, and you'll be hearing about this, Alfred Deakin. Australia's second Prime Minister, Alfred Deakin, was in office from 1903 to 1904 and from 1905 to 1908, as well as 1909 and 1910. Now, Deakin was a lifelong spiritualist and member of the, as you heard earlier, of the Theosophical Society. Now, the Theosophical Society is the organizational body of Theosophy, and it's an esoteric new religious movement, and it was founded in New York City in 1875. Now, Mr. Deakin was a pivotal leader in the Federation of Australia. Deakin was known as a great builder of Australia, and he established key institutions like the High Court. He also introduced the first federal protective tariffs and old age pensions. He initiated the Royal Australian Navy and chose Canberra as the capital state of Australia. Australia's sixth Prime Minister, Sir Joseph Cook, in office from 1913 to 1914, Mr. Cook was a Freemason, and he was initiated into the Lodge Independent Number 8 in 1892. Mr. Cook was a former coal miner, and his major accomplishments while Prime Minister and before that included establishing the Royal Australian Navy. He initiated compulsory military training, and he signed the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. Right? This, I think you'll agree, that kind of flies in the face of people who say that Freemasonry, especially in those days, was really an elite thing for those in the upper classes of society. Right? Australia's eighth Prime Minister, Stanley Bruce, in office from 1923 to 1929. He was a Freemason and was initiated into the Old Melbourneians Lodge number 317 in 1925. While in office, Mr. Bruce introduced compulsory voting in 1924 and oversaw the relocation of Parliament to Canberra in 1927. Right? Australia's 11th Prime Minister, Sir Earl Page. He was briefly Prime Minister in 1939. Page was initiated into the Lodge Prince Leopold number 87 in 1917. He only spent 19 days in office. After that, he was Minister of Health in another government, and he established the Loan Council, introduced national health initiatives, and he promoted rural infrastructure development, including roads and hydroelectric projects. Australia's 13th Prime Minister was a man named Sir Arthur Fadden. He was Prime Minister in 1941. Mr. Fadden was initiated into the Caledonia Lodge number 737 in 1915. Now, after leaving office as Prime Minister, he was a long-serving Treasurer of Australia and a pivotal figure in the Country Party. He oversaw significant post-war economic growth. He also oversaw Australia's involvement in the Korean War, and he also introduced the horror budget, as they call it, to fight inflation and establish the foundation of the Reserve Bank in Australia. Sir Robert Menzies was Australia's Prime Minister from 1939 to 1941 and from 1949 to 1966. Now, Mr. Menzies was initiated into the Austral Temple Lodge number 110 in 1920. Now, Mr. Menzies was known for fostering post-war economic prosperity. He founded the Liberal Party of Australia in 1944, and strengthened alliances between the United States and the UK through the ANZUS and CETO arrangements. He oversaw significant infrastructure development, including the expanding of Canberra and establishing the Menzies government focus on higher education. He was Australia's longest serving Prime Minister. Australia's 18th Prime Minister, Sir John McEwen, in office from 1967 to 1968. Mr. McEwen became a Freemason through Lauderdale Lodge number 361 in 1926. He served as caretaker Prime Minister from 19th of December 1967 to 10th of January 1968. He following Harold Holt's disappearance. If you ever read into that, that was quite rather interesting. There's a lot of conspiracies around Mr. Holt's disappearance. Prior to being a Prime Minister, Mr. McEwen was Minister for Trade from 1956 to 1971, and he revolutionized the Australian trade from post-war reliance to a diversified, sophisticated system. He negotiated crucial international trade agreements, including agreement with Japan, and championed protectionist policies for manufacturing. Australia's 19th Prime Minister, Sir John Gorton, was initiated into Freemasonry in the Karange Lodge number 100 in 1948. Mr. Gorton was Prime Minister from 1968 to 1971. While in office, he significantly expanded federal power in education. He increased social welfare, including the pensioner benefits and aid for poor families. Mr. Gorton also fostered the arts by establishing the Australian Film Development Corporation, and his government also began withdrawing troops from that terrible war in Vietnam. He created the Australian Industry Development Corporation. Australia's 20th Prime Minister, William McMahon, in office from 1971 to 1972. Mr. McMahon was initiated into the Lodge University of Australia, number 544, in 1974. Now, as Prime Minister, Mr. McMahon oversaw the withdrawal of combat troops from Vietnam. He also created the Department of the Environment, Aboriginal Affairs, and the Arts. He also secured Australia's full membership in the OECD. Now, in addition to the information that I have found here, according to the Royal Antediluvian Order of Buffaloes, at least 2 Australian Prime Ministers have belonged to that order. Okay? Like I said, they're not, unlike Freemasons, I don't think some of the other orders really keep a record of who, of famous people who were, especially outside of the United States, who were involved in the organizations. But I think that's rather fascinating. And it doesn't really surprise me at all. So, how do you feel about what you've heard? Some points I gathered was, now we all know about Freemasonry's contribution, to world affairs. But Australia's second Prime Minister, Mr. Deakin, was not a Freemason, and he was a pivotal leader in the Federation of Australia. Right? Now, he was a member of the Theosophical Society, and one of the goals of the Theosophical Society is to form a nucleus of universal brotherhood of humanity, regardless of race, creed, sex, caste, or color. Now, if you look at Mr. Deacon's contributions to society, he's known as a great builder of the nation, and he established key institutions like the High Court, right? So, and he also established old age pensions, helped establish anyway, laid the groundwork. So could this be a result of some of the things that he, could his contribution, shall we say, to Australia be the result of some of those goals that he was learned in the Theosophical Society? I believe it's quite possible. Obviously, he was a man who cared a great deal about his fellow man. Moving on. The sixth Prime Minister of Australia, Joseph Cook, was a former coal miner. Now, this flies in the face of people who are constantly saying that, Freemasonry is or always was, a fraternity that catered to the wealthy. No, it wasn't. And if you look at one of Mr. Cook's achievements was his signing of the Treaty of Versailles. He wanted to bring an end to that awful war. When you think of what that war did, that need for peace, right? That really it is taught in fraternalism. The eighth Prime Minister of Australia, Stanley Bruce, introduced compulsory voting. As in our lodges, he wanted everyone to have a say. Just did, right? Sir Robert Menzies was known for strengthening alliances with the US and the UK through ANZUS and CETO. Okay, and that tells you, this is something, alliances are very important, believe it or not. We like to form amity between other lodges and so on. And you do need them in the lodge, and perhaps that's something he learned there, right? He also oversaw his government's focus on higher education. Here again, education, as I understand it, in Freemasonry, Masonic education is very important, and they really do encourage their members to learn more. Perhaps this is something that Sir Robert Menzies learned in the lodge. The 19th Prime Minister of Australia was Sir John Gorton. Now, he significantly expanded, as you heard me say, federal power in education. Like I said, right? Masonic education is something they really, as I understand it, they really encourage their members to pursue. So perhaps this is something he knew the need for education in society. He also increased social welfare, including benefits for pensioners and for poor families. And he fostered the arts by establishing the Australian Development Corporation. Well, first of all, you really see there, when you look at that, as I keep saying, the importance of education. Probably good chance he picked that up in the lodge. But the idea of looking after the orphan and the widow, as I understand it, is very important in Freemasonry, right? I do know in fraternal circles, we have our benevolent funds. And, if you look at Mr. Gorton was trying to look after pensioners and poor families. Another key thing, the arts are very important in fraternalism. There's a lot of, if you look at our degrees and how they're laid out. So yes, there is, I'm not going to go too far into that, but you'll see how that is very important to those in fraternalism. And here's another big one. Mr. Menzies began the process of withdrawing Australian troops from Vietnam, right? That need for peace, looking after it, not leaving, not keeping members or your countrymen in harm's way. I think that tells you a lot, as you saw it with the previous Prime Minister of Australia, signing that Treaty of Versailles, putting an end to conflict. We don't want conflict in our lodges, put it that way. And finally, the 20th Prime Minister of Australia, William McMahon, he withdrew his combat troops from Vietnam. He also, so it tells you, like I said, that need for peace, we really push that in fraternalism. He also, though, here's a big one. He created the Department of the Environment, Aboriginal Affairs, as well as the Arts. So here was a man who believed in equality for all mankind, and also long before environmentalists started pushing their environmental agenda, here was a gentleman that really helped this country get on the forefront of environmental affairs. See, as you always hear me say, oftentimes our lodges and our members are ahead of the curve on these sorts of issues, be it social welfare, the environment, or equality. Okay? So, and also, if you look at there again, the alliance he formed through the OECD, he helped get Australia full membership in there. Alliances and cooperation are very important in our lodges, right? So, brothers and sisters, what exactly have we learned here? Now, I keep asking this. You heard this before, but we know so much about U.S. presidents and their ties to Freemasonry, but so little about the other leaders of the world and their ties to it to Freemasonry as well. But also, we know so much in many ways. We know a lot more about the history of Freemasonry and world leaders, but so little about these world leaders' ties to other orders and organizations. Prime example here, at least two prime ministers of Australia belong to the RAOB, the Royal Antediluvian Order of Buffaloes, but there's no real record of that. I think in many ways that really points to a need from these fraternal organizations to keep track of who exactly was in it. That better record keeping, as I can say, because I have looked at tried to look around for which lodges they might have belonged to, RAOB lodges, and was unable to find that. So I think that's really something we've learned here today, right? If you are in the RAOB, I would like to hear from you as to what prime ministers, Australian prime ministers, belonged to the RAOB. And if you were in the Theosophical Society, I want to hear more about your organization and other possible leaders that might have belonged, like world leaders that belong to that. I welcome that information, right? I hope that you are enjoying what you're seeing here on Points of Light Radio I'm really enjoying bringing this to you. I really am. Because I find it very exciting when I start studying this and breaking this down. Stuff that, like, parts of history that we never really learned about, right? But where do you want to go next? I want to hear from you, and we'll leave it at that. Before I go, I want to remind you to hit on that PayPal link that you see in the details section of this segment. You can hit on that, make a voluntary donation to the podcast. We will use that to move Points of Light Radio forward. Sorry, I'm got a bit of a cold here. That's why I sound a bit like Barry White, as I always say, right? I also want to remind you that Points of Light Radio is available on both YouTube and Spreaker. Please share, like, and subscribe when viewing Points of Light Radio on YouTube. I more than welcome your comments and input, especially on these segments. I want to see a lot more down there, right? You can follow Points of Light Radio on my Facebook page, and actually I encourage you to do that. You can follow Points of Light Radio on my Facebook page at facebook.com/Points of Light Radio. You have saw guests who reached out to me over my Facebook page or in the comments section on YouTube. So just so that you know that. My X handle is at PO Light Radio. My Bluesky handle is at POLightradio.bsky.social. You can see the link to my Spotify channel, as well as my Points of Light Radio store. brothers and sisters, until we meet again, just step into the light.